could you just talk about how these sort of fit together with the book you have in mind to write?
Yeah. I mean, I started to say that, you remember. Okay, I'm going to have I would say maybe half of this book, at least, would be devoted to ordinary human affairs. In other words, the nature of the human mind, motivations, observations, errors, all sorts of things, liking and disliking of each other, kinds of actions, learning, all of that is involved in that. And as I say, I've given some things. I talked about the political organization here, and we also have. Well, let's see. Let's take a look at this one. This particular stack refers to human nature in general.
It's a big one, huh?
Oh yeah, it's big enough. And let's just see what's involved here. Okay. How about emotions? Where do they fit in? Well, I think emotion, as the name indicates, has something to do with motion or action. Emotion would be the sense that you want to do something, but you're not able to do it at the moment. So emotion would be a kind of set. I'm aiming toward this. I mean, set in the sense of like a dog is pointing in a certain direction, and your emotions essentially. Well, I mean, we can go into specific detail about emotions, but things like anger, fear, disgust, love, they're all in here somewhere. And okay, so you got the concept of emotion there. The construction of preference, where do they come from? You know, economists just take preferences as being autonomous. They're given to you, and you say a whole bunch of individuals with certain preferences will come to some kind of equilibrium. And in fact, the notion of the preferences that economists deal with almost exclusively deal with commodities of one sort or another. So it's very, very narrow when you take a look at that, because the great bulk of our preferences really involve what other people are doing. And okay, so the concept of construction of preference depends to a large extent on who your acquaintances are. For example, if you have different languages, you're very likely to interact much more with people who speak the same language, because otherwise there's an essential barrier over there. In other words, the distance between two people can't be measured simply by physical distance. You have to overcome a whole bunch of other stuff. And okay, so that's in construction of preference, which involves learning, etc., etc. Okay, the concept of self-consciousness. One individual who is always with you is yourself.
Sure.
And I mean, this sometimes gets translated into saying that basically we are all self-interested. But I think that is exaggerated. I mean, there's obviously a lot to it, but it's exaggerated because you could turn this around. The reason we're self-interested is because we're so intimately acquainted with ourselves. And let's see. And then, this is what I call the egocentric predicament. And, okay, and I have a big section on the functions of false beliefs.
What are those functions?
Well, first of all, what are the things that we have to believe in order to prosper? They have to be the things that are immediately influencing us, the things that are contemporary, and the things, of course, that are important to us. The things that are not that important to know the truth of are things which are well in the past, maybe well in the future, and and maybe aspects of the world that you're not interested in. And it's those things which could be subject to false beliefs.
So these are false beliefs more for things that don't matter versus false beliefs that are actually actively helping you?
Yeah, I mean, false beliefs, well, in the sense that knowing the truth or falsity of these things in the objective sense doesn't matter that much because they're remote from you. But on the other hand, they give you a kind of general orientation. I mean, one of the simplest cases is religion. Where does religion come from? I'm not saying that religion itself is false, but obviously the evidence for it is very, very indirect. It depends largely on what's happened in the past, which we can't verify. But it gives a very comforting view of how you live, how you should live, and an even more comforting view of what happens after you die. So you can see lots of different reasons why. And also it's very important that if you got religion with, let's say, strict rules of how to behave and divine sanctions if you don't behave, that can be used to reinforce what you might call socially desirable conduct.
Sure.
Okay. And so that's part of the functions of false beliefs. I got actually a big section on that. Okay, let's see, Self-Esteem, Handbook of Social Cognition. Okay, it's a more elaboration of the themes I've just organized. And it's not only religion, but how you view the human race as a whole, the groups that you, the way you classify people and nations and ethnic groups and professions and so forth and so on. And that determines the attitudes that you have to them. And these attitudes would determine the kind of interactions you have with them. The people you want close to you, because you consider them to be beneficial to you, your objectives, and those that you want far from you because they're inimical to them. So, all right, that's that group. And let's see what else we have here. Let's see. Okay, now we come to the sort of thing that Kahneman was talking about, namely what you might call dual processing. And that is, System 1 and System 2. System 1 being, I have a whole list of descriptions of System 1 versus System 2. Like System 1 is fast, System 2 is slow. System 1 is reflexive and System 2 is reflective, etc., etc.
Are these mostly from that book, Thinking Fast and Slow?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think that is quite incomplete. As I think I recall talking to you about this at some time in the past. First of all, there's not merely this versus that. There's a whole continuum of possibilities. You could say the extreme of System 1 would be reflexes, the thing you do automatically without thinking whatsoever. And, like touching a hot stove and immediately withdrawing, something like that. But then there's the case of just thinking a little bit, should I eat this or that, ice cream or dessert or something like that. And you devote a little bit of thinking to that, and so that would be 1 plus, so to speak. And the more important things are to you, the more you will devote to thinking. And in fact, you could say, how much gain is there from thinking about this particular topic? I'm wasting time on the one hand, and it may be urgent to do something fast, so I can't have that much time to waste. Or it could be that this is some remote intellectual thing, and I will devote lots and lots of time to it. And the extreme case there is where it's worth so much thinking that you can pass the problems on from generation to generation, like Fermat's last theorem, something like that.
Sure.
So you got these all kinds of things. Okay, so this is one thing, just a kind of filling in the gaps of the psychological dichotomy here. The other thing is the following: we are actually all the time having a action which has simultaneous features, delayed features, more delayed features, and so on and so forth. In other words, you can say, even if I'm thinking about something, the thinking itself has to be spontaneous. And which I think of next, it's so, you could always say, I want to think about what I should think next. Or I can reflexly say, let's think about this. So there's a whole bunch of different combinations. It's really much deeper than the standard psychological stuff. You could say, why didn't they do it? Well, psychologists basically are very tied to experimental data. So they essentially will theorize up to the point where they can make experiments to decide how to structure a particular aspect of human nature.
Do you think that Kahneman would disagree with what you're saying?
Say this again?
I think that Kahneman might be pretty open to what you're saying. I think he is mostly using those as metaphors, right?
Oh, I think that's right. I mean, Kahneman is. Did you know that that Kahneman was here? I was still not retired at that point, but he talked to the psychology club, and I attended it.
Oh.
And his theme there was what he called back to Bentham, because he talked about people's attitude toward pleasure and pain, and he actually interviewed people who were undergoing colonic probes and asked them, the level of pain that they were experiencing, and he found that Bentham would say, what you should do is maximize the net gain of net happiness over unhappiness over your lifetime. Say that's rational. Whether it's rational or not is tricky. But what Kahneman indicated is that what people do is not talk about the total, the maximum pleasure, but first of all, the highest point, either pleasure or pain. In other words, the most painful part of this experience or the most pleasant part of this experience. You can see intuitively that what the brain is doing here is kind of setting the boundaries over the alternatives. And and also, so that's one aspect. The other thing is the way it ends. Does it end on a high note or on a low note? And he says you can actually manipulate things to induce people to have a higher level of pain or a lower level of pleasure than they otherwise would by making things very, very painful over here, but making them pretty pleasant at the very end. And people, like you could say, well, one of the experiments also is dipping your hand into ice cold water, and apparently there's a big difference between 14 degrees and 15 degrees Celsius in terms of the amount of pain that you can endure. So what they do is say you have a certain level of experience over here, let's say typically with 15 degree Celsius, which is more painful, and say would you like to have 14 degrees added on to the end? And many people will say yes, because it reduces it by their criteria of the maximum and the end. It looks better, even though you're actually adding more total pain on by prolonging this. So that's a typical kind of thing that happens here.
Yeah, I think I remember that from that book, Thinking Fast and Slow, too.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. And I mean, the funny thing is that Kahneman actually made very few contributions to this area, but he's talking about. I have the people here who who pioneered in that, and Kahneman is not one of them. Okay, so that's that. And all right, what over here? Oh, the psychology of goals. Very important topic. Because you have certain preferences that you have to express them in terms of a time lapse. Where does it go? And in terms of feasibility. You cannot attain what you're looking for in a short period of time, but you may devise an algorithm, so to speak, of steps by which you get closer and closer. And this becomes very, very complicated if you try to do it in realistic terms. What you can do is, in other words, what you have to do is, part of what you're doing is actually acting. I'm doing this and I'm doing that. You could say moving the musculature of the human body is action. And of course, it doesn't necessarily stop, but it reverberates. Like shaking hands with somebody can lead, well, I mean, you can see what I'm talking about here. But, so that's one aspect. But another aspect is gathering information. You know, I still don't know whether to take this path, that path, and so on. And therefore, I'm willing to take some time in order to do it. And the problem is, what is the optimal mix? In other words, how much should you observe? What should you observe? In other words, what kind of observations are relevant to this particular goal setting? It's very, very complicated, and we have to deal with simplified things. I should mention in general that one has to talk about the nature of, let me just finish this stack and then I could talk about that. Okay, there's the psychology of goals, and there's a whole bunch of subtopics in here. And
well, I guess one question I have for you, would you say you're focusing on something more descriptive or more normative with this whole project?
It's both. It has to be both. There has to be descriptive because you're referring to the real world.
Sure. And
it has to be normative because I want to show, what's the overall direction of human history. I mean, and is it guided by some kind of secret path which is not necessarily obvious to people. And so that's what I'm working on. I won't go into details, but okay. Yes, it has to be both.
Would you say that descriptive is in support of the normative then?
Yes, in a certain indirect sense. I mean, what I want to know is how can you put these descriptions together to form a concept of a coherent world? But that requires investigation of the concept of causation. Here, that's this. Causation and science, that's this particular thing. And also, people have preferences. What's the relationship between their preferences and objective preferences, whatever that's supposed to mean? So you have to say, how do people's preferences evolve? That's something we've actually talked about a little bit. How they evolve, and and the final topic here is about individual differences. I mean, you have to keep in mind that when you have a theory, you necessarily are oversimplifying the world. You're taking a whole bunch of a whole realm and you're chopping it up into pieces, convenient pieces, such that they're certain similar to each other within each piece, but they're separate otherwise. So there's a little piece about Handbook of Individual Differences, and you have to keep in mind that in other words, you want to take seriously the concept that people are not interchangeable. And for example, the division of labor, people differ in their natural propensities. They differ in their experiences, their relations with other people, and therefore they tend to develop in different ways. And people tend to specialize. Why specialize? Well, because there's what might be called increasing returns. Okay, so all right, let's see. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about a little, I'm trying to think, have I overlooked something here? Yeah, bounded rationality. That should have been in here somewhere. Maybe I just overlooked it. Well, I guess it's somewhere else. But you're acquainted with the concept of bounded rationality.
I am, yeah.
Mainly, rationality covers a wide range of concepts. You really have to analyze that in some detail. But bounded rationality means bounded attention, for one thing. You can't attend to too many things at once. What you can try to do is attend to something and then shift your attention to something else and then something else. That could be called possible perspectives that you have. And what you want to do is then put these perspectives together in a more coherent picture. So that's what we do. I mean, you have the most obvious thing is you have a three-dimensional object, which is maybe opaque. To get a picture of what the whole shape is, you got to walk around it, see it from different angles, and then you have some picture of the whole object. And if you've got that, then you can say you might be able to predict if I look at things from a new angle, how that thing would look. Or as somebody said, what is it like to be a bat? You remember that famous article? That's by who was that by?
I think that's from Nagel, maybe.
Nagel, right? Thomas Nagel. Yeah. So that's some of the things that we're discussing, and while I'm talking about that, here's that brings me to the structure of organizations here. Okay. Well, here's a list of organizations, just a kind of descriptive list.
Is that also from Herbert Simon? Because I know he's related to bounded rationality, but I think he also had the theory of the firm too, right?
Right. Well, of course, I think Simon invented the term bounded rationality, and he basically was critiquing economic theorists for their concept of we have a utility function, we have a set of alternatives, and we maximize subject to the alternatives. And he says that's a completely unrealistic picture of what's going on because of limited attention, limited ability to think fast. There's a limit to how much you can do that. And we have a limited what you might call dictionary of concepts that we can use. I mean, to develop new concepts, itself requires a lot of effort. Okay, so why organizations? I think I'm just making a list of them here, or actually talking about the internal structures of organizations: private, public, non-profit, nature of the firm and the market, like Coase. You know something about R.H. Coase?
No, I don't think I've heard
Okay, well, we will. I don't want to go into that. And then bureaucracy, which occurs both, of course, in private firms and in the state, and there's certain broad similarities between those two. The concept of efficiency, what that would mean, and the concept of industries rather than individual firms, how they interact with each other. So that's one little topic here. And I should mention one of the most important organizations of all is the family. which I haven't discussed at all here. I've discussed it elsewhere. Okay, let's see what we got here. Okay, socially extended epistemology. In other words, it makes sense to talk about an individual having information or beliefs and things of that sort, and capabilities to do things. But what I'm saying is, you can apply the same thing to organizations. Maybe just approximately, but everything that we're doing is approximation. So I'm not particularly concerned by that. So that's what I call socially extended epistemology. I don't think I'll go into the details of that. Let's see, where are we?
Well, you talk about theories being imprecise, but I wonder, could you avoid that by saying that it's this way plus an epsilon, and then it seems like if you're saying that you're describing reality plus some epsilon, then that sort of does make it more of a precise theory in some ways.
Yeah, that's one way of doing it. I mean, we did, there are all kinds of little tricks that you can do to reduce the amount of ambiguity. I mean, in principle, you could say that I put a probability distribution on them. The trouble with probability is that itself is a very complicated concept. I mean, when you go from certainty or even isolated judgments about various things and try to put them all under a probability roof, you are raising the level of complexity by an order of magnitude. And when you go deeper into probability itself is layered. You've got probability of A, probability of B given A, probability of C given A and B, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got a hierarchical structure there. So lots of luck is what it amounts to. And sure. A lot of the stuff that is done is basically ways of trying to mitigate these very difficult problems. Okay, so let's see, that's organizations. And so as socially extended stuff like that. And contagious ideas, how ideas spread among individuals, how cultures form. So you have a culture consisting of common language, people distributed by age, by sex, and let's see what we have here. Yeah, there's a relationship between epidemiology and learning. Epidemic is, let's say, somebody's infected, and they infect somebody else, and these infect somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. Learning, somebody has an idea, somebody copies the idea, or that same idea is imposed on them, and that extends. So you've got some concept of the diffusion of ideas and or organisms around the thing. So that's not original by me, but that's quite common.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like memes.
Say this?
That sounds a lot like memes.
Memes, yes, it is like memes, and in fact, I have a little section on memes. I think somewhere in this case, and the notion of meme, by the way, has not fared too well.
That's kind of ironic, isn't it?
It is. Well, I mean, the word meme has become part of the language, but the trouble with memes is, first of all, they're not transmitted faithfully. In other words, if you have a gene and it reproduces itself, the gene is usually produced faithfully. You get the same gene afterward. But memes are not the same. It's like you hear one thing. That little play called Telephone, where somebody has a sentence in mind. he whispers it to the next person, and that person whispers it to the third person, and each time there's a little change in the interpretation, and by the time you get to the end, it's completely different. So that's a real disadvantage of memes, and what you can do is say maybe certain aspects are transmitted faithfully, but not others. So what you want to do is to refine the concept of meme to the point where the transmission is faithful. And what you want to do is to talk about the means of transmission also. And that brings me to language, which is still another stack in here. So you've got language, and language you could think of as being a way of transporting ideas. And therefore, there's a lot of similarity between that and transportation in the usual sense. Roads. I mean, a road says that if you have roads between two places, it's easy to get from one place to another. But in general, it's uneconomical to have roads between all possible pairs of places. So what you do is a typical thing would be to have highways between some points, and if you're off the highway, you just you move by a more costly route from the nearest exit, so to speak, and that makes life more complicated. I mean, it's not proportional to distance, so you can't use Euclid directly, but you can talk about a general metric in the world. And also, the degree of language. And the fact that you have two different languages means you have an extra layer of difficulty to get through. I mean, even people speaking the same language very often use words in a different way, as we were discussing on the way here. So you got that, and finally, there's this thing. To transmit an idea, people have to pay attention to you. And that itself is not so easy to do.
Oh yeah.
I mean, think of the whole advertising and marketing industry. It's basically a competition for attention, is what it amounts to. Okay, so let's see, where were we? Oh no, this is from up here. I changed my focus. Okay, organizations there. And let's see, where are we? Oh wow, okay. This is actually part of science. Let me see where I was now. Okay, I talked about this stack. I talked about most of this stack. And okay, just for a change of pace, I'll talk about biology, which is this stack.
Sure.
Okay. First item, Bayesian inference as natural selection. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I think you wrote a paper about it, right?
No, I may have written, but I mean, the basic idea is very simple. You start with a population of traits. Okay, let's say you've got P1 is the number of people having trait number 1 through Pn.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about the relative survivability of these traits.
Yeah.
And you multiply those two together, and that gives you the posterior population.
Sure.
So structurally, Bayesian inference is natural selection.
Right.
Or maybe I should say it the other way around. I don't know. But in any case, you got that. And then here's something about comparing social selection with natural selection. In other words, natural selection works with biological populations and subpopulations and so forth, and the relative sizes of them vary over time. Social selection would talk about customs that are competing with each other, and some of them get bigger in terms of the number people using them and the frequency of use, and others may die out. So you got some pretty simple things there. Let's see. Hierarchicalization over time. Okay, this is certain reasons. Well, primitive man, this is going back to prehistory. Primitive man, which might include also, the pre-human species that evolved into it, is often thought of as being egalitarian. They're in very small groups, and anybody who tries to be, to be ahead of the others is opposed. So that's this anthropologist Boehm has a long treatise on that. But what happened? What happened is that for some reason or other, these equalization type regimes declined in favor of ruling classes arising and a whole system of ranks arising. And there's a big literature on why that occurred. So that's the hierarchical thing. But I mean, the very fact that it's profitable to have larger organizations rather than small ones. In other words, when you have bigger organization, you can have a deeper division of labor, and people can specialize in what they do best, and then trade with each other. But in a bigger organization, it's hard to keep the cap on equality, and therefore, and even in egalitarian societies, there's bound to be some kind of leadership evolved. I mean, not everybody is suitable for leadership, and some people are better at it than others. So there's going to be some kind of differentiation there. What was yeah, in fact, I have a whole this thing. Yeah, these two out here are the theory of controls. In other words, you have a whole bunch of people, each one having their own separate preferences and having their own capabilities and so forth. You have to have something that holds the society together. And one thing that does it is leadership of one sort or another. Another thing that does it is a system of norms which are generally adhered to, and that might be called the principles of justice that you give. And the third thing actually is the price system. I mean, here we come to pure economics again, where the price system allocates things in a fairly efficient manner according to some criteria. The trouble is that the price system itself is not self-sustaining because the price system can be perverted by the growth of monopolies, by conspiracies, so to speak, and so forth. I mean, Adam Smith was quite aware of all of these things. And so what you have to have is some sort of overarching point of view that creates things. In other words, it sanctions, positive sanctions for good behavior and negative sanctions for bad one. And the question is, how do these things arise? Sure. Okay. Well, maybe that's enough for one session.
Yeah, maybe this. If there are just a couple ideas that you want people to remember out of all this, what would they be? Or what do you think, like maybe the top two?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That's real tricky. I mean, of course, I want to start with what everybody knows, everyday events, and then eventually I would get into the that is for human. Eventually, I'd get into the biological things that we were just talking about, and after that, even extended into the physical.
Oh, say the house was on fire. Which of these stacks would you grab?
I really can't answer that question.
Okay. Well,
I mean, the closest that it's come is the case I mentioned. taking things out of the library.
Yep.
And they were stored in the back, and the back door flew open because it wasn't latched properly. and at least one stack fell out. And I told you that story, that that there was a friendly truck that temporarily blocked the stuff while I was able to recruit that stack and some other stuff that had fallen off.
Do you remember which of these that was?
Yeah, it was, let's see. Yeah, actually, which was it? That's a good question. I mean, I don't think that stack exists as a stack anymore.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But I remember it was in this corner. But I forgot. But that's been completely mixed up since then.
I guess that's a sign of how much reorganization you've done.
Oh yeah, a tremendous amount of reorganization, and I mean the reason is that. I mean, I don't want to go through this stack and that stack and they're not arranged so as to be chronological, even within themselves, not arranged. So, what I've been doing over these last few months is trying to get more coherence in the thing.
Sure.
Okay, so let's see. We were in biology, and maybe I'll just stop at that point. We haven't finished the biology thing yet.
Yeah, we can come back to it.
Right.
That story is a good place to stop, though, I think.
Okay, so organizations. Okay, that was here. And